The 1930s were a paradox, a time of Great Depression and great discovery. Across the world, scientists were unlocking the secrets of the atom, the mysteries of flight, and the new frontiers of radio waves. Humanity stood on the brink of a technological revolution, yet that same knowledge would soon be weaponized to create the most destructive war the world had ever known. Before starting our video, if you love to watch history-related stories about World War II, please subscribe to our channel and like the video so it helps me to make more good quality videos for you. The story started. The First World War had already shown that science could kill on a scale never before imagined, with poison gas, tanks, and machine guns turning battlefields into slaughterhouses. But by the late 1930s, a new generation of scientists, engineers, and visionaries believed that technology could once again change the balance of power, this time through speed, power, and the mastery of the unseen forces of nature. Among them, a young German engineer named Wernher von Braun dreamed of reaching space with rockets. A British physicist named Robert Watson Watt imagined a way to see enemy aircraft using radio waves. Across the Atlantic, American researchers explored the power locked inside the atom, while in secret laboratories from Berlin to Tokyo, military minds began to realize what such discoveries could mean for war. The world was unknowingly preparing for a scientific arms race, one that would unfold in laboratories, factories, and secret bunkers long before the first shots were fired in 1939. Germany's rebirth of science and the rise of the military machine. When Adolf Hitler rose to power in 1933, he saw technology as a key to restoring Germany's pride and dominance after the humiliating defeat of World War I. The Treaty of Versailles had forbidden Germany from developing new weapons, but Hitler's regime ignored the restrictions from the very start. In hidden research facilities, scientists were told to design weapons that would shock the world. The Nazi regime invested heavily in aeronautics, rocketry, chemistry, and even experimental physics. Engineers who once dreamed of exploration now worked for war. At Kummersdorf near Berlin, a small team of young scientists began experimenting with liquid-fueled rockets. Among them was Wernher von Braun, a brilliant student who idolized the space visionaries of the past. He believed that one day rockets could carry humans beyond the Earth, but under Hitler's rule, his ideas found a darker purpose. Instead of carrying explorers to the stars, his rockets would carry explosives across continents. Germany also nurtured pioneers in aviation, companies like Messerschmitt, Heinkel, and Junkers who pushed the limits of flight. Engineers began testing new aerodynamic designs and powerful jet engines that could make aircraft faster than any before. In a time when most nations still flew propeller planes, Germany was dreaming of machines that could fly at nearly 900 kilometers per hour, the first jets. These developments were kept under extreme secrecy. Hitler's propaganda machine spoke of national renewal, while behind closed doors, his scientists and engineers were preparing for a technological blitzkrieg. Lightning war driven by science. Britain's quiet revolution, the birth of radar. Across the English Channel, Britain's scientists saw the threat growing. German air power was expanding at a terrifying rate. To defend their island, they needed something revolutionary, a way to detect enemy aircraft long before they could be seen. In 1935, a Scottish engineer named Sir Robert Watson Watt developed an experimental device that could locate aircraft using radio waves. It was a simple idea but revolutionary. By bouncing radio signals off objects in the sky and measuring the return signal, it was possible to detect incoming bombers. This invention, known as radar, short for radio detection and ranging, would change the course of the war. At first, it was a secret project, hidden under the code name Chain Home. Dozens of radar stations were built along Britain's coasts, forming an invisible shield that would later help save the nation during the Battle of Britain. Britain didn't just rely on brute force. It relied on brains, physicists, mathematicians, and engineers who worked around the clock to turn ideas into life-saving defenses. By 1939, while Germany prepared for offense, Britain quietly built the technology of early warning. The American awakening, science meets industry. In the United States, the 1930s were marked by economic hardship, the Great Depression, but also by immense industrial and scientific growth. American universities and industries became centers of innovation. Researchers in California and New York delved into atomic physics, while others explored aviation and radio technology. American companies like Boeing, Lockheed, and Douglas developed advanced aircraft, laying the foundation for a future air fleet that would dominate the skies. Scientists at MIT and Bell Labs worked on radio communications, radar experiments, and early computing devices. Although the U.S. was not yet at war, its scientific base was strong. When war eventually came, America's combination of science and mass production would become one of its greatest weapons. But in 1939, that was still a future possibility. At the time, it was Europe, particularly Germany, where the most aggressive and secretive scientific developments were happening. Japan and the Eastern Front of Science. While Germany and Britain raced ahead in aviation and radar, Japan pursued its own secret projects in aeronautics, submarines, and biological research. The Japanese military was obsessed with technological self-reliance, and by the late 1930s, Japan had one of the most advanced naval aviation programs in the world. At the same time, Unit 731, a covert biological warfare unit in Manchuria, conducted horrific human experiments in the name of science. Under the guise of research, they studied plague, anthrax, and chemical weapons. These dark scientific pursuits would later be one of the most chilling legacies of the war's hidden science. The world of physics, the atom beckons. In laboratories across Europe, physicists were uncovering something that would change human history forever: the structure of the atom. Scientists like Ernest Rutherford, Niels Bohr, and Enrico Fermi were exploring how atoms could be split, releasing unimaginable energy. In 1938, two German scientists, Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann, made a groundbreaking discovery. They successfully split the uranium atom in a process known as nuclear fission. Their colleague, Lise Meitner, who had fled Nazi Germany due to her Jewish heritage, helped explain the results from exile. The implications were staggering. If controlled, nuclear fission could produce endless power. If weaponized, it could produce the most powerful bomb ever created. Though the world did not yet grasp it, the discovery of nuclear fission marked the beginning of the atomic age, and the race for the atomic bomb had quietly begun, even before the war started. Science as the new weapon. By 1939, the world's scientists were divided by politics, ideology, and geography, but united by curiosity and ambition. Some dreamed of exploration, others served their nation's militaries. The discoveries they made would soon be turned into tools of destruction. Germany had its rockets and early jet programs. Britain had radar. The US had industrial might and emerging nuclear research. Japan had advanced naval science. The Soviet Union was developing its own networks of scientists under state control. The stage was set. The next war would not only be fought by soldiers, it would be fought by scientists, engineers, and machines. The laboratory would become a battlefield. And as 1939 dawned, a single act, the invasion of Poland, would ignite the conflict that would transform these scientific dreams into deadly realities. The war that began in silence. On September 1, 1939, the roar of German tanks crossing into Poland shattered the fragile peace of Europe. Within days, Britain and France declared war on Nazi Germany. The Second World War had begun. But unlike the thunder of artillery and the clatter of machine guns that defined the First World War, the early months of World War II were filled with a strange quiet, the phony war. Behind this deceptive calm, however, scientists and engineers were already racing to build weapons that would decide the fate of nations. And nowhere was that race more urgent than in Britain. Britain's desperate gamble, defending an island nation. Britain faced a terrifying reality. Germany's military might was unmatched in Europe. Within months, Hitler's blitzkrieg overran Poland, Denmark, Norway, Belgium, and France. By mid-1940, Britain stood alone, surrounded by enemies, outnumbered, and under siege. The only thing separating Britain from Nazi domination was the English Channel, and the brave pilots of the Royal Air Force, RAF. But courage alone could not win the skies. The Germans had more planes, more pilots, and the element of surprise. The British needed something extraordinary, a weapon that could see the invisible. And that weapon was radar. The birth of radar, a secret revolution. In 1935, years before the war began, a Scottish engineer named Robert Watson Watt had been asked by the Air Ministry if it was possible to build a death ray, a device that could destroy enemy aircraft with radio waves. Watson Watt replied that such a weapon was impossible, but a machine that could detect aircraft using radio waves might be achievable. Working with his assistant Arnold Wilkins, he conducted experiments near Daventry, England. They bounced radio signals off a flying Handley Page bomber, and to their astonishment, the returning signal revealed the plane's presence. They had just proven the principle of radio detection. By 1939, Britain had constructed a chain of massive radar towers along the coast, each one transmitting pulses of radio energy into the sky. This system was codenamed Chain Home. It was the world's first integrated air defense network, a technological masterpiece that could detect enemy bombers while they were still 100 miles away. Few outside a handful of engineers and officers even knew it existed. To the public, it was a mystery. But in secret, Britain had built an invisible shield. The science behind the shield. Radar worked by sending out short bursts of radio energy that would reflect off solid objects, like aircraft. The returning signal could be displayed on a cathode ray screen, showing blips that revealed the direction and distance of the incoming planes. While primitive by modern standards, it was revolutionary. Before radar, aircraft could only be detected by sound or sight, often when it was already too late. Each radar station relayed information to filter rooms, where teams of women from the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, WAAF, plotted the enemy's movements on large maps. These maps were then transmitted to Fighter Command, where commanders like Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding directed squadrons to intercept the enemy before they reached British cities. The result was a stunning scientific synergy, human intelligence guided by technology, creating a real-time picture of the war in the air. The Battle of Britain begins. By July 1940, Hitler was confident that Britain would soon fall. The Luftwaffe, Germany's mighty air force, prepared to destroy the RAF and clear the way for invasion. The German plan was simple: bomb airfields, factories, and radar stations until Britain's defenses collapsed. On August 13, 1940, Adlertag, Eagle Day, the Luftwaffe unleashed its assault. Hundreds of German bombers and fighters roared across the Channel, expecting to catch the British unprepared. But to their surprise, British fighters were waiting. The radar network had spotted the incoming wave long before it arrived. Fighter Command scrambled squadrons of Spitfires and Hurricanes to intercept them. Time and again, the Germans were met by defenders who seemed to know exactly where and when they would strike. The Luftwaffe's commanders couldn't understand how Britain always appeared ready. They suspected spies or luck, but the real secret was scientific precision. The unsung heroes, the women of radar. Behind the scenes, thousands of women worked tirelessly in radar stations, plotting rooms, and communications hubs. These were the members of the WAAF, the unsung heroes who translated radar signals into tactical decisions. Each blip on a screen represented dozens of lives. Each coordinate passed to Fighter Command could mean the difference between victory and destruction. Working under immense pressure, these women formed the nervous system of Britain's air defense, turning lines of light into life-saving information. Their calm professionalism kept the RAF one step ahead of the enemy throughout the battle. The turning point: science triumphs over numbers. Through August and September 1940, the skies above Britain were a constant battleground. German bombers struck London, Coventry, and other cities in a relentless campaign known as the Blitz. But despite terrible losses, the British never broke. Radar allowed the RAF to deploy its limited aircraft efficiently, always sending fighters where they were needed most. It was like fighting with eyes while the enemy was blind. The cost was high, thousands of civilians died in the bombings, but Germany failed to gain air superiority. By October 1940, Hitler postponed his invasion plans indefinitely. Britain had survived. The secret within the secret: electronic countermeasures. Even as radar saved Britain, scientists continued to improve it. Engineers developed smaller, more powerful devices that could detect not just aircraft, but also ships and submarines. Meanwhile, British intelligence worked on electronic countermeasures, such as window, strips of aluminum foil dropped from aircraft to confuse German radar. This clever trick made enemy screens light up with false targets, rendering their defenses useless. These innovations would later play a crucial role in the bombing campaigns over Europe and the D-Day landings. The power of coordination, science, strategy, and sacrifice. The Battle of Britain wasn't won by aircraft alone. It was won by the integration of science, communication, and courage. Radar gave the RAF the early warning it needed. The filter rooms turned data into strategy. And the pilots, the few, as Churchill called them, turned that strategy into victory. Every link in the chain was essential. Remove radar and the entire system would collapse. The Battle of Britain proved that technology could be as decisive as any weapon. It marked the beginning of a new kind of warfare, where information and innovation could defeat sheer numbers. Aftermath: the birth of electronic warfare. With the victory in 1940, Britain had done more than save itself. It had proven the value of science in warfare. The success of radar led to massive investment in other secret projects: better radar, night fighter guidance, radio navigation, and even early computers for code breaking. At Bletchley Park, a quiet mansion in Buckinghamshire, a team of mathematicians led by Alan Turing began working on another secret weapon, a machine that could think faster than any human. This would become the next front in the scientific war. But for now, in 1941, Britain had weathered the storm. Its invisible shield, born of science and ingenuity, had held firm. The war was far from over, but the balance had shifted. Technology had proven its power, and the world had witnessed the dawn of a new era. The age of electronic warfare. The war you couldn't see. By 1940, while bombs fell over London and fighter planes clashed in the skies, another war raged in total secrecy. A war fought not with guns, but with numbers, logic, and machines. It was the battle to read the enemy's mind, to break the code that protected every German order, every naval movement, and every plan. At the heart of this war was a quiet English country house called Bletchley Park. Here, a group of mathematicians, linguists, and inventors worked around the clock to solve the greatest cryptographic puzzle of all time: the Enigma. The Enigma machine, Germany's invisible armor. Before the war, German engineers had developed a mechanical cipher device called the Enigma machine. It looked like a small typewriter, but inside it hid an intricate system of rotors, wiring, and electrical contacts that could scramble letters into seemingly random symbols. Each keystroke changed the electrical path, so even typing the same letter twice would produce a different output. The number of possible combinations was astronomical, over 150 quintillion. To the German military, Enigma was unbreakable. Every branch of the Wehrmacht, the Army, Navy, and Air Force used it to send encrypted messages. These messages carried everything from troop movements to U-boat coordinates. If Britain could read them, it could change the course of the war. But first, someone had to break Enigma. The Polish pioneers, the first to break the code. Turing, a mathematician from Cambridge, was fascinated by logic and the idea of machines that could think. At Bletchley, he would become the architect of one of the most powerful code-breaking tools ever built: the bomb machine, a mechanical brain. Turing realized that breaking Enigma wasn't about brute force, it was about logic. Each day, German operators chose new rotor settings and plug-board connections. If those could be guessed or deduced, the rest would follow. Turing designed a machine called the bomb, inspired by the Polish version but vastly improved. It used hundreds of rotating drums wired to simulate multiple Enigma machines, testing possible settings thousands of times faster than any human could. The first British bomb, built by engineer Harold "Doc" Keane at the British Tabulating Machine Company, began operating in 1940. Soon, dozens more were running day and night in secret facilities. Each time a bomb found a possible Enigma key, it would print the result, which cryptanalysts would then test manually. Gradually, a pattern emerged. Messages started to make sense. By late 1940, Bletchley Park was reading a growing number of German Army and Air Force messages. For the first time, Britain could see into Hitler's communications, the beginning of the Allied intelligence network known as Ultra. The human side of genius, Turing, and his team. Alan Turing wasn't alone. He worked alongside extraordinary minds like Gordon Welchman, Dilly Knox, John Tiltman, and Joan Clark, one of the few women mathematicians at Bletchley. Together, they formed a team that combined mathematical brilliance with practical engineering. Life at Bletchley was strange and exhausting. Workers were sworn to absolute secrecy. Even their families had no idea what they did. The mansion was divided into huts, each with its own task. Hut 6 handled Army and Air Force codes. Hut 8, led by Turing, focused on naval enigma, and others worked on Italian, Japanese, and diplomatic ciphers. Days blurred into nights. Cigarette smoke filled the rooms. They lived on little sleep, endless cups of tea, and a shared obsession with patterns and possibilities. Yet despite the stress, there was humor and camaraderie. They called themselves the geese that laid the golden eggs and never cackled. The U-boat menace, the Battle of the Atlantic. While radar had saved Britain from the Luftwaffe, a new threat lurked beneath the waves, the German U-boat fleet. These submarines prowled the Atlantic, sinking supply ships and starving Britain of food, fuel, and weapons. The only way to stop them was to know where they would strike. But naval enigma was far more complex than the Army's version. The addition of an extra rotor increased the possible combinations exponentially. Breaking it seemed impossible until a series of lucky captures changed everything. The captured codebooks, chance meets genius. In 1941, British commandos and sailors captured several German vessels, including U-110, containing an intact Enigma machine and codebooks. These priceless finds gave Bletchley Park the clues they needed to rebuild the German Navy's encryption patterns. Turing's team worked furiously, using the new information to design faster, more sophisticated bombs. By mid-1941, they could regularly decrypt naval messages, tracking U-boat positions and convoy routes. Armed with this intelligence, the Royal Navy began to reroute ships away from danger, ambush submarines, and reclaim control of the Atlantic. For the first time in months, Britain's supply lines began to recover. Ultra-intelligence was saving thousands of lives, and it remained one of the most closely guarded secrets of the war. The birth of modern computing. As the war expanded, new cipher machines appeared, even more complex than Enigma. To tackle them, British engineers built the first programmable electronic computers. The most famous was Colossus, designed by Tommy Flowers, an engineer at the Post Office Research Station. Built in 1943, Colossus used thousands of vacuum tubes to process signals at unprecedented speed. It was used to break the German Lorenz cipher, which protected high-level messages between Hitler and his generals. Colossus could perform calculations thousands of times faster than any human. It was the ancestor of modern computers, and its development marked the dawn of the digital age. After the war, Colossus was destroyed to maintain secrecy. Only decades later would its true importance be recognized as the world's first electronic computer. Secrecy, sacrifice, and silence. The people of Bletchley Park were bound by oaths that lasted long after the war ended. For decades, they could not tell anyone what they had done. Even family members who lost loved ones in battle never knew that the codebreakers might have saved millions more. Historians estimate that the work done at Bletchley Park shortened the war by at least 2 years, perhaps even more. Yet none of its heroes received public recognition during their lifetimes. Alan Turing himself suffered a tragic fate. Despite his immense contribution to victory and to computing, he was later prosecuted for his homosexuality in 1952, then still a crime in Britain. He died 2 years later, never knowing that his work would one day be celebrated as one of the greatest scientific achievements in human history. The power of information. The story of Bletchley Park revealed a new truth about war. Information was power. For the first time, victory depended not just on soldiers and weapons, but on data, mathematics, and machines. This invisible war, the War of Codebreakers, shaped every campaign that followed, from the Battle of the Atlantic to the D-Day landings. As Churchill himself said, "It was thanks to Ultra that we won the war." Bletchley Park's secret triumphs marked a turning point in human history. Science had not only created weapons, it had created intelligence, the ultimate strategic tool. From dreams of space to weapons of war. At the dawn of the 20th century, the idea of reaching space belonged to science fiction. Writers like Jules Verne and H.G. Wells imagined voyages beyond Earth. Visionaries such as Konstantin Tsiolkovsky in Russia and Hermann Oberth in Germany calculated how rockets might actually achieve it. By the 1920s, a small circle of enthusiasts in Germany was turning those dreams into experiments. They were students and engineers, not soldiers. They called themselves the Verein für Raumschifffahrt, the Society for Space Travel. Among them was a gifted, ambitious young man named Wernher von Braun. Von Braun's imagination reached for the moon, but his country's destiny dragged him toward war. When Hitler seized power in 1933, the dream of spaceflight became entangled with the nightmare of the Third Reich. The rise of rocket science in Germany. The Treaty of Versailles had forbidden Germany from building long-range artillery, but it said nothing about rockets. That loophole caught the eye of the German Army's Ordnance Department. In 1932, the Army invited Oberth's students to demonstrate a liquid fuel rocket at Kummersdorf, near Berlin. The test fizzled, but the potential was obvious. A 20-year-old von Braun was recruited on the spot. Under Captain Walter Dornberger, the Army began funding secret rocket research. Their goal was purely military, to create a weapon that could strike without warning, faster than any airplane or shell. The experiments soon outgrew Kummersdorf. In 1936, construction began on a vast new facility on the Baltic island of Usedom, near a fishing village called Peenemünde. Here, far from spies and prying eyes, Germany built the most advanced rocket laboratory on Earth. Peenemünde, the secret city. Peenemünde was unlike any place on the planet. Spread across sand dunes and pine forests, it housed test stands, design offices, wind tunnels, launch pads, and barracks for thousands of workers. It even had its own airfield and power plant. Von Braun, still in his 20s, became the technical director of the Army Research Center. He led hundreds of young engineers who designed, calculated, and tested prototypes day and night. They dreamed in equations and explosions. In their workshops, early models of the A-series rockets paved the way for something revolutionary. A missile that could reach the edge of space and return to Earth at supersonic speed. It would become known as the A-4, later renamed the V2 Vergeltungswaffe 2, the Vengeance Weapon 2. The science of the V2, the first ballistic missile. The V2 was a masterpiece of engineering. Standing 14 meters tall and weighing 13 tons, it was powered by a liquid fuel engine that burned ethanol and liquid oxygen to generate 25 tons of thrust. When launched, it climbed more than 80 kilometers into the stratosphere, briefly entering space, before arcing down toward its target at 3,500 kilometers per hour. Unlike earlier weapons, it could not be intercepted. By the time its roar reached the ground, it had already exploded. To make it work required breakthroughs in aerodynamics, propulsion, materials, and guidance. Gyroscopic systems kept it stable. Advanced pumps fed fuel to its combustion chamber. Engineers devised new alloys to survive the heat of re-entry. Every problem they solved brought humanity one step closer to spaceflight, and brought Europe one step closer to devastation. Science under the swastika. To Hitler, the V2 was not a scientific milestone but a weapon of revenge. After the bombing of German cities in 1942, he demanded a device that could strike London and terrify the Allies. Dornberger and von Braun promised him results. That promise came at a terrible moral price. When the project required more labor than the engineers could supply, the SS stepped in. Peenemünde began using forced labor from concentration camps, and later, when Allied bombing forced production underground, the SS moved assembly to a horrific complex near Nordhausen called Mittelwerk. There, thousands of prisoners from Dora Mittelbau worked and died building V2 rockets in tunnels cut through rock. For every V2 launched, more people died making it than were killed when it struck. It was the darkest fusion of science and cruelty in human history. Von Braun later claimed his focus was purely technical, that he dreamed of space, not war, but history would never forget where those dreams began. The first flight, October 3, 1942. After years of failures and explosions, the team at Peenemünde finally achieved success. On October 3, 1942, Test Stand 7 erupted with fire. The A-4 rocket rose into the sky, its exhaust glowing like a miniature sun. It reached 85 kilometers in altitude and traveled 192 kilometers downrange, splashing into the Baltic. For the first time in history, a man-made object had entered space and returned. Dornberger declared, "We have invaded space with our rocket and for the first time established a bridge between the Earth and the cosmos." Hitler, when told, was astonished, but his mind went immediately to its potential as a weapon of terror. The Allied raid on Piedmont. By 1943, British intelligence had discovered hints of a mysterious German rocket program. Photo reconnaissance planes confirmed it, strange test stands and blast marks on Usedom. On the night of August 17th to 18th, 1943, the RAF launched Operation Hydra, a massive bombing raid on Piedmont. Hundreds of bombers dropped over 1,800 tons of explosives. The attack destroyed parts of the facility, killed key engineers, and forced the program to relocate underground. The raid delayed the V-2's deployment by months, a critical reprieve for the Allies. But it could not stop the weapon altogether. The V-weapons campaign. In September 1944, Germany finally unleashed its vengeance. The first V-2 struck Paris, then London. Within months, more than 1,300 rockets rained down on Allied cities. Each carried a 1-ton warhead and caused catastrophic damage. Unlike the earlier V-1 flying bombs, pilotless jet drones that could sometimes be shot down, the V-2 offered no warning, no defense. Civilians would hear only the distant thunder of its explosion, then seconds later the echo of its approach. Psychologically, the impact was immense. Militarily, it changed little. The rockets came too late to alter the war's outcome, but they announced the dawn of the missile age. Operation Paperclip, the race for the rocket men. As the Third Reich collapsed in 1945, both the United States and the Soviet Union raced to capture German scientists and their technology. Von Braun and his team surrendered to American forces in Bavaria, fearing Soviet capture. Under the secret American program Operation Paperclip, more than 120 engineers were brought to the U.S. They worked first at Fort Bliss and White Sands, then at the newly formed NASA. Their expertise powered the development of the Redstone and Saturn V rockets, the same lineage that would carry Apollo 11 to the moon in 1969. Meanwhile, the Soviets captured Piedmont's remains and several key specialists of their own. Their work would lead directly to the R-7, the rocket that launched Sputnik and Yuri Gagarin. Thus, the tools of terror became the engines of exploration. The Cold War's space race was born from the ashes of the Nazi program. Legacy Science's double edge. The story of Piedmont embodies the paradox of science. It shows how knowledge itself is neutral, its morality shaped by those who wield it. The same equations that guided a V-2 to London guided Apollo 11 to the Sea of Tranquility. The same scientists who once served Hitler later built humanity's path to the stars. In Piedmont's ruins, the line between genius and guilt remains blurred. It is a warning that progress without conscience can lead to horror, and that even in darkness, the human urge to reach beyond the horizon endures. The end of the propeller age. By 1940, the skies over Europe were alive with the roar of piston engines. Spitfires, Messerschmitts, Mustangs, and Hurricanes ruled the air, their propellers slicing the wind at speeds that had seemed impossible just 2 decades earlier. But the engineers of the future were already thinking beyond propellers. They dreamed of aircraft that would no longer rely on spinning blades to push air backward. Planes that would inhale air, compress it, ignite it, and hurl themselves forward with pure thrust. That dream was the jet engine. It was a technology that promised to break the limits of speed and altitude, to rewrite the laws of flight. But, like so many of the scientific revolutions of the Second World War, it was born in secrecy, nurtured in desperation, and unleashed in violence. The birth of the jet idea. The idea of a jet engine had been around long before the war. In the 1920s, 2 men working independently, one in Britain, one in Germany, conceived it almost simultaneously. In Britain, a young Royal Air Force officer named Frank Whittle proposed using a turbine to compress air and burn fuel in a continuous stream. His 1930 patent described a modern turbojet in almost perfect detail, but the Air Ministry dismissed it as impractical. They believed piston engines could always be improved and that Whittle's vision was science fiction. Meanwhile, in Germany, an equally brilliant young engineer named Hans Joachim Pabst von Ohain was exploring the same concept. He managed to attract the attention of Ernst Heinkel, an aircraft manufacturer obsessed with speed and innovation. Heinkel believed in von Ohain's dream and gave him a workshop to build it. By 1937, von Ohain's prototype, the Hees 1, produced enough thrust to spin a small turbine without a propeller. A year later, on August 27, 1939, just days before the war began, the world's first jet-powered aircraft, the Heinkel He-178, took to the sky. It flew for 6 minutes. It was small, loud, and revolutionary. Heinkel had just created the future, but almost no one knew it. Germany's secret jet program. When war broke out in September 1939, Germany's leadership focused on proven weapons: tanks, bombers, and conventional fighters. Jet technology was seen as too risky, too expensive, and too new for immediate production. Yet a few visionaries inside the Luftwaffe persisted. Chief among them was General Ernst Udet, a World War I ace fascinated by new technology. He pushed for development of advanced aircraft that could restore Germany's edge in the air. By 1941, engineers at Messerschmitt were working on a radical new fighter, the Me-262, powered by twin turbojets known as Jumo 004 engines. Its sleek, swept wings and streamlined fuselage looked like something from another century. But the engines were unreliable. They melted, seized, or exploded after just a few hours of use. Germany lacked the high-temperature alloys needed to withstand jet combustion. And Adolf Hitler, obsessed with offense, insisted the Me-262 be built as a Blitzbomber, fast bomber, instead of a fighter, delaying its deployment. The first jet flights. Despite technical setbacks, test pilot Fritz Wendel made the first official flight of a jet-powered Me-262 on July 18, 1942. The aircraft soared smoothly, leaving the propeller planes of the time far behind. Its top speed exceeded 540 miles per hour, 870 kilometers per hour, nearly 150 miles per hour faster than the best Allied fighters. The Luftwaffe's elite pilots were stunned. The Me-262 could climb faster, fly higher, and accelerate beyond anything the Allies possessed. It was a glimpse of a new age, the first true jet fighter in history. But it came too late. Germany's factories were bombed, its fuel reserves dwindling, its supply chains collapsing. Even when production ramped up in 1944, there were not enough trained pilots or materials to make the Me-262 the war winner it might have been. The Me-262 in combat. In mid-1944, the Me-262 finally entered service with the Jägerschwader 7, JG-7, Nowotny Squadron. Commanded by Ace Walter Nowotny, the unit began intercepting Allied bomber formations over Germany. The results were terrifying. In a single attack, a handful of Me-262s could destroy entire bomber groups before the escorts even reacted. Their 430mm cannons shredded B-17s and B-24s in seconds. Allied pilots called them silver arrows, deadly, untouchable, and fast as lightning. But there were weaknesses. The jet engines took nearly a full minute to spool up, making the Me-262 vulnerable during takeoff and landing. Allied fighters soon learned to attack airfields and catch them in these moments. And because the engines lasted only about 25 flight hours before failure, maintenance was a nightmare. In the end, fewer than 300 Me-262s ever flew in combat. They scored impressive kills but couldn't stop the overwhelming Allied tide. The Heinkel He-162, the Volksjäger, people's fighter. As Germany faced collapse, its leaders demanded a miracle weapon that could be built cheaply and flown by inexperienced pilots. The result was the Heinkel He-162, a desperate attempt to mass-produce a jet fighter from wood and scrap metal. Nicknamed the Salamander, it had its jet engine mounted on top of the fuselage and a top speed over 500 miles per hour. It was incredibly fast, but dangerously unstable. Many test pilots died simply trying to take off. Only a few dozen saw combat before the war's end. Most were destroyed on the ground or captured intact by Allied troops. The He-162 symbolized both Germany's ingenuity and its collapse, a triumph of design born too late to matter. The jet bombers Arado and beyond. Germany also experimented with jet bombers such as the Arado AR-234 Blitz, the world's first operational jet bomber. It was so fast that no Allied fighter could catch it. Used primarily for reconnaissance and high-speed strikes, it photographed enemy positions with impunity. In the final months of the war, Arado jets flew missions over England and the Western Front, outrunning every interceptor. But as fuel shortages worsened and production crumbled, even this marvel could not alter Germany's fate. Britain's jet revolution. While Germany raced ahead in secret, Frank Whittle in Britain had finally found his moment. After years of neglect, the Air Ministry authorized flight tests of his Gloster E.28/39, powered by his own Whittle W.1 engine. On May 15, 1941, the British jet took off from RAF Cranwell and flew successfully. Whittle had done it, and he had done it alone with minimal support. Soon, the design evolved into the Gloster Meteor, Britain's first operational jet fighter. The Meteor entered combat in July 1944, not against German jets, but against V-1 flying bombs streaking toward London. It was fast enough to intercept them, and by war's end, Meteors patrolled Europe's skies. Though it never met the Me-262 in battle, the Meteor ensured Britain entered the jet age alongside Germany. America's jet effort, the Bell P-59 and P-80. In the United States, jet research began later but advanced rapidly. With British help, American engineers built the Bell P-59 Aerocomet, the first U.S. jet, in 1942. It was underpowered and slow but provided vital experience. By 1945, Lockheed's P-80 Shooting Star, designed by Kelly Johnson's Skunk Works, was ready for action. It arrived too late to see combat in World War II but became the foundation for post-war jet fighters and Cold War designs. The jet race had officially begun. The human factor, pilots, and peril. Flying jets in the 1940s was as dangerous as it was exhilarating. Engines flamed out midair, wings tore apart under high speed, and landing gear often failed. Many test pilots perished pushing the boundaries of speed. German ace Adolf Galland, who flew the Me-262, said, "It was like being pushed by angels. The future of flight had arrived." For those who survived, the sensation of pure jet thrust was unforgettable, smooth, constant, unstoppable. The propeller's vibration and drag were gone, replaced by the clean surge of compressed air and fire. The technology behind the jet. At its heart, the jet engine is elegantly simple. Air intake pulls air into the front of the engine. Compression squeezes the air to increase pressure. Combustion injects fuel and ignites it, creating hot gases. Turbine spins from the gas flow, powering the compressor. Exhaust expels gases at high speed, generating thrust. This cycle, continuous and self-sustaining, marked a radical leap from piston engines, which relied on separate cylinders firing in sequence. By war's end, both axial flow and centrifugal flow jet engines had been perfected, designs that remain the basis of modern aviation today. Aftermath, the jet age dawns. When Germany surrendered in May 1945, the Allies seized hundreds of jet aircraft and thousands of blueprints. British and American engineers studied them intensively. The Me-262, AR-234, and He-162 became the templates for post-war design. Captured German scientists were relocated under Operation Paperclip, working on early U.S. jets and missiles. Meanwhile, the Soviets reverse-engineered engines and airframes, leading to the birth of aircraft like the MiG-15, which would dominate the Korean War just a few years later. The jet age had begun, not in peace, but in the smoke of a dying empire. Legacy, the gift and the curse of speed. The jet engine changed everything. War, travel, distance, even the rhythm of life itself. In a single decade, humanity went from propeller-driven biplanes to supersonic flight. The boundary between Earth and sky had blurred forever. But like the V-2 rocket, the jet story carried a moral shadow. Its first flights were not toward exploration, but toward destruction. Only later would those same engines carry civilians across oceans and astronauts toward the heavens. The jet age proved that science cannot be contained by war. It survives, adapts, and eventually serves humanity. The Silent Front. World War II was fought on land, sea, and air, but it was also fought in silence. Behind the noise of artillery and the roar of aircraft, a hidden war raged in offices, bunkers, and underground rooms filled with typewriters, wires, and strange electromechanical devices. This was the war of codes and ciphers. Each side struggled not only to send its own messages securely but also to read those of its enemies. The ability to decrypt enemy communications, to know their plans before they struck, could turn defeat into victory. It was a war of intellects, mathematicians, linguists, engineers, and inventors, whose weapons were logic, calculation, and persistence. And the story of how they cracked the most famous code of all, the German Enigma, is one of the most extraordinary triumphs of science and secrecy in history. The Enigma machine, Germany's unbreakable cipher. At the heart of this story stood a small, innocent-looking machine, the Enigma. Invented by German engineer Arthur Scourbius after World War I, the Enigma was originally intended for commercial use, banks, corporations, and governments who needed to send secret messages. It looked like a typewriter packed in a wooden box, but its keys were connected to an intricate set of rotating wheels, or rotors, that scrambled letters into an ever-changing cipher. Each time an operator pressed a key, the rotors turned, changing the electrical path through the machine and producing a different encrypted letter. With 3 or more rotors, each settable to 26 positions, the number of possible settings exceeded 150 million. To the Germans, Enigma was unbreakable. To the Allies, breaking it became an obsession. The first cracks, the Polish Cipher Bureau. Long before Britain and America joined the war, the first breakthrough came not in London or Washington, but in Warsaw. In the early 1930s, the Polish Cipher Bureau secretly obtained details of the commercial Enigma machine. A team of brilliant young mathematicians, Marian Rejewski, Jerzy Rosicki, and Henryk Zygalski, began studying it. Using algebraic analysis and brilliant logic, Rejewski deduced the wiring of Enigma's rotors and built a working replica. To automate the search for daily keys, he invented a device called the bomba kryptologiczna, the cryptologic bomb. It was one of the earliest automatic code-breaking machines ever created. For several years, the Poles read German military messages with stunning success. But as the Germans added more rotors and complexity, the system became harder to break. By 1938, the Poles knew they were running out of time. In July 1939, just weeks before Germany invaded Poland, they shared everything with Britain and France. They handed over their replicas, methods, and notes, the keys that would later unlock the entire Enigma system. Their contribution was one of the most important in the entire war. Bletchley Park, the secret heart of code-breaking. When war began, Britain established a secret code-breaking headquarters at a Victorian estate north of London called Bletchley Park. It looked like a country mansion, but inside, mathematicians, engineers, linguists, and chess champions worked day and night surrounded by endless cups of tea, paper, and typewriters. Among them was a quiet, eccentric genius named Alan Turing. Turing was a mathematician from Cambridge who had already written groundbreaking papers on logic and computation. He believed that problems of logic could be solved by a theoretical machine capable of performing any sequence of steps, a concept that would one day define the modern computer. At Bletchley Park, that theory found its first battlefield. The bomb, Alan Turing's machine. Building on the Polish work, Turing and engineer Gordon Welchman designed an advanced mechanical computer known as the bomb. Each bomb used rotating drums to simulate Enigma rotors, testing thousands of possible settings every minute. By searching for logical contradictions in the encrypted messages and using known or guessed plaintexts, called cribs, the bomb could narrow down the correct key in hours rather than weeks. The first bomb went operational in March 1940. By 1943, over 200 machines were running across Britain, operated mainly by the Women's Royal Naval Service, WRNS. Young women who worked tirelessly in shifts to feed, test, and record the machine's output. Every day, as the Germans changed their Enigma settings at midnight, the race began anew. If the codebreakers could find the key before noon, their intelligence would still be fresh enough to use. They called this priceless stream of decrypted information Ultra, short for ultra-secret. The impact of Ultra turning the tide. Ultra changed everything. It gave the Allies a window into German operations that no spy or scout could provide. In the Battle of the Atlantic, Ultra allowed British convoys to avoid U-boat wolf packs. In North Africa, it revealed Rommel's supply shortages, helping Montgomery win at El Alamein. Before D-Day, Ultra confirmed that the Germans expected an invasion at Calais, not Normandy. The Germans never suspected that their most secure communications were compromised. They attributed their defeats to luck or superior Allied resources, never realizing that the enemy was reading their mail. Prime Minister Winston Churchill later said, "It was thanks to Ultra that we won the war." Historians estimate that Ultra shortened the conflict by at least 2 years and saved millions of lives. The other codes, Lorenz, Purple, and the wider cipher war. Enigma was not the only code in play. The Germans also used a more complex teleprinter cipher for high-level messages, known as the Lorenz SZ4042. Its 12 wheels produced an astronomical number of combinations, far more than Enigma. Breaking Lorenz required a different approach. At Bletchley Park, engineer Tommy Flowers, working with mathematician Max Newman, designed a new kind of machine and electronic computer to handle the calculations. That machine was called Colossus. Using thousands of vacuum tubes, Colossus could read encrypted teletype signals and test millions of possibilities per second. It was the first large-scale programmable electronic computer in history, decades ahead of its time. Meanwhile, in the Pacific, American codebreakers tackled Japan's Purple cipher, used by the Foreign Office. Their success helped predict Japanese movements, including key operations around the time of the Battle of Midway. Codebreaking had become a truly global war of machines. Alan Turing, the man who knew too much. Turing's brilliance and his machines helped change the course of the war, but his personal story ended in tragedy. After the war, his contributions remained classified, and he received little public recognition. In 1952, he was prosecuted under British law for homosexuality, then a crime, and forced to undergo chemical castration. 2 years later, he died at age 41, officially ruled a suicide. Only decades later did the world learn the full extent of his genius. In 2009, the British government issued a formal apology. In 2013, he received a royal pardon. Today, Turing is remembered as the father of modern computing, the man who, through logic and compassion, helped save civilization. The American side, Arlington Hall and the Navy's cryptologic triumphs. While Britain led in breaking Enigma and Lorenz, the United States excelled in the Pacific. The U.S. Army's Signal Intelligence Service, SIS, led by William Friedman, cracked Japan's diplomatic codes, while the U.S. Navy's OP-20G unit broke military ciphers. Their crowning achievement came in 1942 when they deciphered messages revealing Japanese plans to attack Midway Atoll. Armed with this intelligence, Admiral Nimitz set an ambush that destroyed 4 Japanese aircraft carriers, the turning point of the Pacific War. By 1945, American cryptanalysts operated massive electromechanical systems, precursors to post-war computers, capable of processing millions of messages. Women of the Code War. Tens of thousands of women served in code-breaking roles during World War II, often with little recognition. At Bletchley Park, more than 75% of the staff were women, linguists, mathematicians, typists, and operators. Figures like Joan Clark, Turing's colleague and close friend, Mavis Beatty, and Margaret Rock played pivotal roles in solving Enigma variants. In the U.S., the Code Girls of Arlington Hall and the Waves, women accepted for volunteer emergency service, were equally vital. Without their precision, patience, and skill, the machines would have been useless. Their work remained secret for decades. Only recently have historians begun to give them the credit they deserve. Secrecy and legacy. The ultra-secret remained hidden long after the war. For decades, even military leaders were unaware that Enigma had been broken. When the story was finally revealed in the 1970s, it stunned the world. By then, the seeds planted at Bletchley Park had already blossomed into the computer revolution. The logical frameworks, machines, and teamwork developed there became the blueprint for modern computing, cybersecurity, and artificial intelligence. What began as a desperate effort to win a war ended up transforming human civilization. Conclusion: the War of the Machines. The Codebreakers' victory was invisible yet decisive. Their war was not fought with bullets, but with bits. Not in trenches, but in logic. The story of Enigma and Ultra reminds us that wars are not won only by strength, but by intellect and collaboration. It was the triumph of human thought over chaos, of reason over secrecy, and of science as a force for both survival and progress. The birth of the Wunderwaffe myth. By 1943, the German war machine was beginning to crumble. The Allies had landed in North Africa, the Soviets were pushing back on the Eastern Front, and the Luftwaffe was losing control of the skies. Hitler, once confident in his armies, began to look for salvation in technology. He believed that a single breakthrough weapon, a Wunderwaffe or miracle weapon, could still win the war. In his speeches, he promised the German people that secret weapons were coming soon, weapons that would turn defeat into victory. The propaganda ministry spread these tales widely, keeping hope alive even as cities burned. And indeed, behind closed doors, brilliant engineers and scientists were working feverishly on designs that seemed to belong to the future. Some of them, like the V-2 rocket and the Me-262 jet, were real and revolutionary. But others existed only on paper, or as prototypes that never left their hangars. The vengeance weapons, V-1 and V-2. The first real Wunderwaffen were the V-1 and V-2, both built under the direction of Wernher von Braun and Walter Dornberger at the secret base of Peenemünde. The V-1 Buzz bomb was a pilotless flying bomb powered by a pulse-jet engine. It carried nearly a ton of explosives and could reach speeds of 640 kilometers per hour. Its buzzing sound, like a motorcycle in the sky, became infamous across Britain. When the sound stopped, you had seconds before it exploded. The V-2 rocket was far more advanced. The world's first ballistic missile. It reached the edge of space before crashing down at supersonic speed. It killed thousands in London, Antwerp, and other cities, but it came too late to change the war. Even so, the V-2 laid the groundwork for the space age. After the war, von Braun and his team were taken to the United States under Operation Paperclip, where they built the rockets that eventually sent Apollo 11 to the moon. The weapon that began as a terror machine became the tool of humanity's greatest dream. The jet revolution beyond the Me-262. The Messerschmitt Me-262 was the world's first operational jet fighter. But it was only the beginning. Germany's engineers designed dozens of other jet-powered aircraft, some of them breathtakingly futuristic. The Horten Ho 229, built by the Horten brothers, was a flying wing stealth jet made of wood and composite materials. Its shape was eerily similar to the stealth bombers that would appear decades later. The Heinkel He-162 Volksjäger, or People's Fighter, was a small jet designed to be built quickly by unskilled labor. It could reach 800 kilometers per hour, but its engines often failed mid-flight. Other designs, such as the Lippisch P.13A, experimented with ramjets, tailless wings, and even coal-powered propulsion. These projects showed the Germans' astonishing creativity and their desperation. If the war had lasted another year, the skies over Europe might have been filled with aircraft that looked more like spaceships than planes, submarines of the future, type XXI U-boats. While the Allies perfected radar and sonar, the Germans worked to reinvent submarine warfare. The result was the type XXI U-boat, the world's first true submarine, designed to operate almost entirely underwater rather than as a surface ship that could submerge. Featured streamlined hulls inspired by whales, snorkel devices to run diesel engines while submerged, automatic torpedo reloaders, silent electric motors. The Type XXI could stay underwater for days, travel faster submerged than on the surface, and attack without warning. But production delays and sabotage meant only a few entered service before the war ended. Still, their design inspired every modern submarine built afterward, including American and Soviet nuclear subs. The America bomber, the dream of global reach. Even as Germany struggled to defend itself, Hitler dreamed of striking at America. He wanted a bomber that could cross the Atlantic, attack New York, and return home. The America bomber program was born. Designs included the Messerschmitt Me-264, a long-range bomber capable of 15,000 kilometers range. The Junkers Ju-390, a massive aircraft that supposedly made a test flight within sight of the U.S. coast, though this claim remains unproven. The Horton Ho-18, a six-jet flying wing that looked like a futuristic stealth aircraft. None of these reached full production, but the idea of intercontinental bombing laid the foundation for the Cold War's nuclear bombers and ICBMs. The secret bases, underground cities of steel. As Allied bombers devastated German industry, the Nazi regime moved much of its weapons production underground. In the Harz Mountains, a vast complex called Mittelwerk was carved into rock to build V-2 rockets using forced labor from concentration camps like Dora Mittelbau. Tens of thousands of prisoners died in horrific conditions, working in darkness and filth to produce Hitler's miracle weapons. Other secret sites included Project Reese in the Owl Mountains, a labyrinth of tunnels intended for secret research or even a last headquarters for Hitler. B-8 Bergerstall in Austria, where Me-262 jets were assembled underground. These underground factories were engineering marvels but also monuments to cruelty. They showed how the Nazi regime's obsession with technology was built on the suffering of countless innocent lives. The Nazi UFOs, myths, and mysteries. After the war, rumors spread of Nazi flying saucers, circular aircraft powered by exotic engines that could defy gravity. Some stories were based on real prototypes. The SAC AS-6 circular wing aircraft, the Vril and Honebu projects, supposedly anti-gravity craft designed under SS supervision. But historians have found no solid evidence that these advanced UFOs ever existed beyond sketches and post-war myths. Much of the legend came from a mix of captured German technology, Cold War secrecy, and public fascination with UFOs in the 1950s. Still, the myth persists, feeding countless books, movies, and conspiracy theories. The superweapons that could have changed the war. Among the many projects that never left the drawing board were the Landkreuzer P.1000 Rat, a 1,000-ton tank armed with naval guns and powered by submarine engines. It would have been larger than a house. The V3 cannon, a giant, multi-chambered gun designed to bombard London from France. It was destroyed by Allied bombers before completion. The Sun Gun, an orbital mirror weapon proposed by Nazi scientists to focus sunlight and burn cities from space. These ideas ranged from the ambitious to the absurd. They revealed the extent of the Nazi leadership's desperation and its detachment from reality. Science, propaganda, and madness. By 1944, Wunderwaffe had become both a technical goal and a propaganda weapon. Posters, radio broadcasts, and speeches promised that new miracle weapons were coming any day now. But for every real invention, there were a dozen empty promises. The Nazi regime had become addicted to fantasy, imagining salvation through technology while refusing to face defeat. The scientists, meanwhile, were trapped between patriotism, fear, and ambition. Some truly believed they were saving Germany. Others simply wanted to see their creations fly, regardless of who used them. In the end, the dream of the Wunderwaffe collapsed along with the Third Reich itself. The legacy, the blueprint of the future. Though Germany lost the war, its technology shaped the modern world. Jet engines became the foundation of post-war aviation. Rockets launched satellites and astronauts. Submarine designs influenced every navy. Even aircraft shapes and stealth concepts born in Nazi labs resurfaced decades later in US and Soviet designs. In this sense, the Wunderwaffe did not win the war, but it won the future. The same engineers who built Hitler's secret weapons went on to shape the Cold War's arms race and humanity's reach for the stars. Conclusion: the price of genius. The story of the Wunderwaffe is both awe-inspiring and tragic. It shows how human creativity can soar to incredible heights and sink into terrible darkness. The scientists of the Third Reich dreamed of mastering the sky, the sea, and even space itself. But in their quest for power, they served a regime built on terror and destruction. Their legacy reminds us that science is not good or evil. It is only as moral as the hands that wield it. In the end, the Wunderwaffe were not miracles of victory. They were warnings from history that technology without conscience can lead a civilization to ruin. The end of the war, the beginning of a new race. May 1945. Germany surrendered, its cities in ruins, its armies broken. But as Allied soldiers advanced into the heart of the Third Reich, they discovered something extraordinary: labs, underground factories, and hidden archives filled with advanced technology that seemed decades ahead of its time. American, British, and Soviet intelligence agents quickly realized that the war for Europe was over, but the war for knowledge had just begun. Both sides understood that the scientists behind Germany's rockets, jets, and secret weapons could hold the key to future global dominance. Whoever controlled them could control the skies and perhaps even space. Thus began Operation Paperclip, one of the most secret and controversial missions in history. The origins of Operation Paperclip. The operation was named after the paperclips used to attach scientists' files to their security dossiers. It was launched in 1945 under the authority of the U.S. Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, JIOA. Its mission: to locate, capture, and bring key German scientists, engineers, and technicians to America. But there was a problem. Many of these scientists had been members of the Nazi Party, and some were deeply involved in war crimes, slave labor, and weapons that had killed thousands. Officially, the U.S. had rules against employing Nazis. Unofficially, those rules were quietly ignored. In a time when the Soviet Union was rapidly advancing in Eastern Europe, morality gave way to strategy. As one American officer put it, "We couldn't afford to let the Russians have them." The hunt for the rocket men. Among the most valuable targets were the engineers from Peenemünde, the coastal base where the V-2 rocket had been built. The Americans called them the Rocket Men. Leading them was Dr. Wernher von Braun, the charismatic, visionary scientist who had dreamed of reaching the stars even as he built weapons for Hitler. As Germany collapsed, von Braun and his team made a daring decision. Rather than surrender to the Soviets, they fled south, carrying crates of documents and blueprints, and surrendered to U.S. forces in Bavaria. The Americans quickly realized who they had found. Von Braun and over 100 of his engineers were quietly transported to the United States, their Nazi affiliations erased or adjusted with paperclips on their files. The Soviet grab, Operation Osoaviakim. While the Americans had Paperclip, the Soviets launched their own Operation Osoaviakim in October 1946. Soviet troops and NKVD officers rounded up more than 2,000 German specialists and their families, loading them onto trains bound for secret research cities inside the USSR. These scientists were taken to places like Gorodomlya Island, where they were ordered to rebuild Germany's advanced weapons, this time for Stalin. Both the US and the USSR now possessed the brains of Nazi science, and both were determined to outdo the other. The Cold War had officially begun. From V-2 to the space age. In America, the Peenemünde engineers were first sent to Fort Bliss, Texas, and White Sands Proving Ground, New Mexico. There, they began assembling and launching captured V-2 rockets for testing. At first, they were treated as prisoners under close watch. But as the Cold War intensified, their importance grew. By the early 1950s, von Braun and his team had become central figures in the U.S. missile program. They developed new rocket designs, leading to the Redstone and Jupiter missiles, precursors to the rockets that would carry satellites and astronauts. In 1958, von Braun became the head of the NASA Marshall Space Flight Center, where he designed the Saturn V, the rocket that took humanity to the moon. The man who once built Hitler's vengeance weapon now built the vehicle that carried Neil Armstrong to the Sea of Tranquility. It was one of history's greatest ironies. Other paperclip scientists and their legacies. Operation Paperclip didn't just recruit rocket engineers. It brought over more than 1,600 scientists and technicians across numerous fields. Kurt Debus, later director of NASA's Kennedy Space Center. Hubert Strughold, a Luftwaffe medical researcher whose work helped create the U.S. Air Force's space medicine program, though his Nazi-era experiments remain controversial. Arthur Rudolph, who managed the production of the Saturn V but was later accused of war crimes at the Middlework rocket factory. Hans von Ohain, co-inventor of the jet engine, who continued research for the U.S. Air Force. Walter Schreiber, involved in biological warfare studies, later linked to unethical medical experiments. Many were brilliant innovators. Many had dark pasts. And America, eager for progress, often looked the other way. The moral paradox. Operation Paperclip raised questions that still echo today. Can scientific knowledge be separated from the crimes of those who created it? Should morality ever be sacrificed for technological advantage? The U.S. government's official stance was pragmatic. These men had valuable knowledge that could not fall into Soviet hands. But to Holocaust survivors and moral leaders, it felt like a betrayal. How could the same country that had fought against Nazi tyranny now welcome its scientists? The truth was grimly simple. In the emerging atomic and missile age, the Cold War demanded results, not purity. The Soviet side of the equation. In the Soviet Union, captured German scientists contributed to the early R-1 and R-2 rockets, which were direct copies of the V-2. Under the supervision of Sergei Korolev, the Soviets quickly surpassed the Germans' original designs. By 1957, the USSR stunned the world by launching Sputnik 1, the first artificial satellite, using technology born from German ideas and Soviet genius. Just 4 years later, Yuri Gagarin became the first human in space. The Soviets had beaten the Americans to orbit, a victory built on the same foundation of captured knowledge. Operation Paperclip had given the US the moon. Operation Osoaviakim had given the USSR the stars first. Hidden experiments and dark legacies. Not all Paperclip scientists worked in rockets or space. Some delved into darker areas of research, biological warfare, chemical weapons, and human endurance. Documents later revealed that some of these men had conducted experiments on prisoners in concentration camps. Their data was used in early U.S. studies of high-altitude flight and hypothermia quietly and without public acknowledgement. When the truth began to surface in the 1980s, several former Paperclip scientists fled or were stripped of citizenship. But by then, their contributions were deeply woven into American science and defense. The story of Operation Paperclip became not just a historical curiosity, but a moral lesson. The pursuit of knowledge is never free from ethical consequence. The legacy of Operation Paperclip. Despite its controversy, Operation Paperclip had a profound and lasting impact on global history. It directly shaped the U.S. space program, NASA, the Intercontinental Ballistic Missile, ICBM, systems of the Cold War, the jet and aerospace industries that still define modern flight, the foundation of Cold War science and espionage. By the 1960s, the children of Piedmont had built America's rocket fleet. By the 1970s, they had guided men to the moon. And by the 1980s, their work had created the tools for nuclear deterrence, ensuring that a Third World War never began. But the price of that knowledge, measured in the suffering of wartime victims, remains a stain on the legacy of progress. As one historian wrote, "The road to the moon was paved with bones. Science without borders, conscience without memory." Operation Paperclip blurred the line between enemy and ally, between guilt and genius. It showed that in the modern world, science is a weapon, one that every nation seeks to control. The scientists who once built rockets for Hitler now built them for freedom. But the question remained, did they truly change, or did they simply change uniforms? Von Braun himself once said, "The rocket worked perfectly, except for landing on the wrong planet." It was a grim joke, but a revealing one, for the rocket had no conscience. It was only a tool like science itself, and whether it landed on London, Moscow, or the moon depended entirely on who controlled it. The dawn of a new age. By the late 1940s, the Cold War was in full swing. The nuclear bomb, the jet, and the rocket, all born from World War II secret science, had reshaped global power. Operation Paperclip had ended the era of national science and begun the era of technological rivalry without limits. It transformed warfare into a battle of intellect, invention, and information. And in that new age, the lessons of the past were often forgotten. The scientists who once served tyranny now built the machines of deterrence, convinced that this time, their work would protect humanity. But in the silence of space and the glow of the atom, the echoes of the past still whispered. Progress without conscience is the most dangerous weapon of all. Conclusion: from the ashes of war to the stars. Operation Paperclip was both a triumph and a tragedy. It gave humanity the tools to explore the heavens, and the power to destroy itself. It turned the weapons of Hitler's Germany into the engines of the space race, the Cold War, and modern science. The same minds that built the V2 built the Saturn V. The same science that leveled cities launched astronauts. And the same human curiosity that once served destruction now reached for the infinite. But it left behind a haunting truth. The future is always built on the past, and we must choose whether that foundation is made of knowledge or of ashes. The dawn of the post-war era. By 1945, the world was exhausted, devastated, and wary. Europe lay in ruins. Cities were leveled. Economies collapsed. Millions had died. Yet, amidst the rubble, the seeds of modern science and technology had been planted. The war had forced nations to innovate at unprecedented speed, and in doing so, had created knowledge and tools that could be repurposed for peace. The V2 rocket became the foundation of space exploration. The atomic bomb led to nuclear energy and the Cold War. The Me-262 jet inspired modern aviation and supersonic flight. Code-breaking and computing at Bletchley Park gave birth to computers and information technology. It was a paradox. War had destroyed humanity, yet also accelerated its future. Jet aviation takes flight. The Germans had introduced the world to jet-powered flight with the Me-262. After the war, both the United States and the Soviet Union seized German engineers and designs to develop their own jet programs. In the US, planes like the F-86 Sabre and B-47 Stratojet were influenced by German technology. In the USSR, aircraft such as the MiG-15 owed much to captured Messerschmitt designs. By the 1950s, the jet age had begun, transforming military aviation, passenger travel, and global logistics. Supersonic speed, pressurized cabins, and aerial refueling became possible because of lessons learned under wartime pressure. The nuclear legacy. The Manhattan Project had shown humanity that the atom could be a weapon and a source of energy. After the war, nuclear power plants began producing electricity, first in the 1950s. The Atomic Energy Commission oversaw research into reactors, medicine, and isotope production. Nuclear physics became central to both medicine, radiotherapy, imaging, and industry, energy, material science. Yet the destructive power of atomic bombs created the doctrine of mutually assured destruction, shaping diplomacy and defense policies for decades. The same scientists who helped create destruction now guided cautious exploration and policy, illustrating both the promise and peril of science. Space exploration, from V2 to Saturn V. Wernher von Braun and his team, brought to the United States through Operation Paperclip, began transforming the V2 rocket into tools of exploration. The Redstone and Jupiter rockets carried the first American satellites. The Saturn V, the most powerful rocket ever built, launched humans to the moon. In 1969, when Neil Armstrong took his first steps, the journey had its roots in Penman's secret laboratories and the urgency of war. It was a remarkable transformation. A weapon of war had become a vehicle of human curiosity and discovery. Even Soviet space achievements, Sputnik, Gagarin's flight, and lunar probes, owed much to captured German technology and wartime rocketry research. Computing, from codebreakers to modern computers. The war also accelerated computing. At Bletchley Park, Alan Turing and his team built the bomb and helped create Colossus, the first programmable electronic computer. In the US, IBM machines and early ENIAC computers advanced calculation, logistics, and ballistics. Post-war, this expertise became the backbone of modern computing. Mainframe computers for industry and government. Early personal computing experiments in the 1960s and 1970s. Foundations for software, algorithms, and eventually the Internet. Without WWII's secret science, the digital revolution might have arrived decades later. Medicine and chemistry, from labs to life. Wartime science also spurred advances in medicine. Penicillin, mass-produced during World War II, saved millions of lives and launched the antibiotic era. Synthetic materials, like nylon and plastics, developed for military use, became staples of modern life. Nuclear medicine arose from radiation research. Trauma care and surgical techniques improved thanks to battlefield hospitals and military research. Even seemingly small innovations like blood plasma storage, vaccines, and antiseptics had roots in wartime urgency. Submarines, jets, and future warfare. The innovations of Nazi Germany, captured by the Allies, became the blueprint for post-war military technology. Type XXI U-boats inspired modern submarines capable of long-term submerged operations. Flying wings like the Horton designs informed stealth aircraft decades later. Rocket and missile programs birthed the ICBM and space launch vehicles. The Cold War was not just a battle of ideologies. It was a battle of technology, much of it originating from WWII's secret science. Ethics, responsibility, and the lessons of the war. World War II taught humanity that science is power without conscience unless tempered by ethics. Atomic bombs leveled cities and killed hundreds of thousands. Codebreakers' work saved millions, yet remained secret for decades. Operation Paperclip accelerated progress, but often ignored moral responsibility. Modern science, from AI to genetics, nuclear power to space exploration, carries echoes of World War II. Brilliance and danger coexist. Every discovery can be used to heal or destroy, depending on human choice. The lesson is clear. Innovation must be guided by conscience. The global technological explosion. By the 1960s and 70s, the technologies pioneered during World War II had become universal. Rockets, moon landings, satellites, and space probes. Jets. Commercial aviation and supersonic travel. Computers. From mainframes to personal computers. Medicine. Antibiotics, vaccines, trauma care, and nuclear medicine. Nuclear energy. Power generation and propulsion. The war had compressed decades of technological progress into a few years, forever changing humanity. From war's end to the modern world. World War II was a crucible. A period of extreme stress and challenge that forced humans to innovate faster than ever before. The scientists, engineers, and mathematicians of that era were driven by necessity, curiosity, and sometimes fear. Their legacy is everywhere. Every satellite orbiting Earth. Every jetliner crossing the sky. Every modern computer, phone, and medical device. Even our understanding of nuclear physics and the universe itself. The secret science of World War II didn't die with the war. It became the foundation of the modern world. The final reflection. Looking back, we see a paradox. Science during World War II was a tool of destruction and salvation. It created bombs, rockets, jets, and computers, sometimes killing, sometimes saving. Its greatest minds were moral and ethical pioneers as much as technical geniuses, often wrestling with the consequences of their work. And yet, it also offers hope. Humanity's capacity for innovation, when combined with responsibility and vision, can transform even the darkest moments into progress. The rockets that once fell on cities now carry astronauts. The code-breaking machines that fought war now power computers that connect the world. The lessons of secrecy, urgency, and ingenuity continue to guide science, diplomacy, and exploration. Conclusion: the secret science of World War II. From rockets to jets, from Enigma to the atomic bomb, from Wonderwaffe to space exploration, the secret science of World War II shaped the 20th century and beyond. It reminds us that knowledge is neither inherently good nor evil. It is a reflection of the hands that wield it. It also reminds us that war, while horrific, can accelerate human ingenuity in ways peacetime cannot. The challenge for modern society is to harness that ingenuity for creation, not destruction, and to ensure that the fire of human curiosity illuminates rather than consumes. World War II ended in 1945, but its science, its lessons, and its spirit of discovery continue to shape humanity to this very day.